The mansion in Shaker Heights towered over the other houses on Farmount Street, as if reminding the neighbors that money does matter after all. Margaret Winters bought it 20 years ago, when her late husband's business was just starting to turn a serious profit. Now, standing at the panoramic window of the living room with a cup of coffee in her hands, she watched the January snow cover the perfectly manicured lawns. She was widowed at 48. At 58, she met Daniel Coleman at the Huntington Country Club gym. He was 26 years younger, athletic, and had a charm that made women turn their heads after him. Margaret was no exception. "Your coffee will get cold," she heard a familiar voice say behind her. Daniel was coming down the marble stairs, wearing the expensive tracksuit she had bought him last week. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his smile was as charming as ever. "I'm admiring the view," Margaret replied without turning around. "Remember how Roger and I used to dream about a house like this?" Daniel came up behind her and put his arms around her shoulders. "Roger was a smart man. He would have been proud of what you've built." Margaret tensed slightly. In the 2 years they had been together, Daniel had learned to say the right things, but today there was something in his tone that sounded false to her. Perhaps it was because the night before she'd accidentally seen his credit card statement, which she had paid. $15,000 a month on restaurants, clothes, and entertainment. "I have a meeting with Tom today," she said, freeing herself from his embrace. "We need to discuss some financial matters." Daniel nodded, but she noticed his jaw tense for a moment. "Something serious?" "Estate planning, routine." Margaret finally turned to him. "What are your plans?" "I'm meeting Mike at the gym. Maybe we'll hit the casino afterwards." Daniel smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "If you don't mind." Margaret wanted to say she did, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded and headed for the door. "See you tonight." Daniel watched her go, then quickly went up to his bedroom. He took out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Mike, it's Dan. Listen, I need to borrow another $5,000. No, just temporarily. Yes, I know I already owe you 10. Just give me a little more time." The voice on the other end was harsh. "Time ran out 2 months ago, Daniel. My people don't like to wait. I'll take care of it." "I promise." Daniel clenched his fist. "Just give me another week." The short beeps on the phone were the only response. Tom Bradley's office was located in downtown Cleveland, in one of those old buildings that exuded respectability and reliability. Tom had been the Winters family lawyer for 15 years, since Roger's time. He met Margaret in his office, furnished with dark wood and leather chairs. "Margaret, you look worried," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. "Tom, I want to review the will." Margaret folded her hands in her lap, especially the part about Daniel. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Trouble in paradise?" "I don't know. Maybe." Margaret sighed. "He's a good man, but I'm starting to question his motives." "You left him $2 million and a house in Miami. That's a lot of money. That's exactly why I want to change everything." Margaret stood up and walked over to the window. "If we split up, I don't want him to get a penny." Tom made notes in his notebook. "What about Carol? Does she know about your relationship with Daniel?" "We haven't spoken in months. She doesn't approve of my choice." Margaret smiled bitterly. "She says he's using me." "And what do you think?" "I think my daughter may be right." Carol Winters sat in her modest apartment in Cleveland Heights, staring at a photograph of her father on the mantelpiece. Roger Winters had been a good man who had built his business from the ground up. He would never have approved of his wife dating a man who was young enough to be her son. The ringing of the phone interrupted her thoughts. "Carol? It's Mom." "Hi, Mom." Carol didn't hide the coldness in her voice. "I wanted to talk to you. Maybe we could meet for lunch." "If it's about Daniel, I have nothing more to say than I already have." "On the contrary, I think you were right." Carol sat up straight in her chair. "What happened?" "Let's meet tomorrow at Lola's at 1 o'clock. I'll explain everything." After Margaret hung up, Carol sat in silence for a long time. She worked as a manager at a bank, earned a modest income, and never asked her mother for financial assistance. After her father's death, she distanced herself from the family business, preferring to build her own career. But that didn't mean she didn't worry about her mother. Daniel Coleman had come into their lives like a hurricane, charming, attentive, saying all the right things. But Carol could see through his mask. She noticed how he appraised the house, how he took an interest in her mother's financial affairs, how he skillfully steered the conversation toward money. Meanwhile, Daniel was sitting in the Flats bar on the east side of town, meeting with Mike Corelli. Mike was the kind of person you didn't want to mess with, but Daniel had no choice. He needed money fast, and banks wouldn't give loans to people without a steady income. "You're playing with fire, Daniel," Mike said, sipping his whiskey. $15,000 isn't pocket change. "I know, but I have a plan." "What plan?" Daniel leaned closer. "Margaret is rich, very rich. If we get married." "If," Mike emphasized. "What if you don't get married?" "We will. She's in love with me." Mike laughed. "In love with your youth and good looks. But she's not stupid, Daniel. Sooner or later she'll figure it out." "That won't happen. For your sake, I hope not. Because my investors aren't known for their patience." That evening, Daniel returned home and found Margaret in the library. She was reading a book, but he could see that her mind was elsewhere. "How was your meeting with Tom?" he asked, sitting down on the arm of her chair. "Fine, the usual." Margaret closed her book. "How was your day?" "I met with Mike. We discussed the possibility of starting a small business." "What kind of business?" Daniel hesitated for a moment. "A gym, small but modern. I think it could be profitable." Margaret nodded, but her expression remained unreadable. "How much will it cost?" "About $100,000 to start. Maybe a little more." "That's a lot of money, Daniel." "I know, but it's an investment in our future." Margaret rose from her chair. "I need to think about it." When she left, Daniel remained alone in the library. He walked over to the window and looked out at the snow-covered garden. It was all so close. Wealth, security, a life without worries. But he felt it slipping through his fingers. The next day, Margaret met Carol at Lola's restaurant in the city center. Her daughter looked tired, but her eyes were determined. "Mom, what's going on?" Carol asked as soon as they ordered. "I'm thinking about breaking up with Daniel." Carol couldn't hide her relief. "What happened?" "A lot. He spends huge amounts of money, doesn't work, and now he's asking for $100,000 for some mythical business." Margaret shook her head. "I feel like a fool." "You're not a fool. You're a lonely woman who believed a charming man. Your father would never have approved of this. Dad would want you to be happy, but not by letting yourself be taken advantage of." Margaret nodded. "I've already talked to Tom about the will. If we break up with Daniel, he won't get anything." "Does he know he was included in the will?" "Yes, I told him last year." Carol frowned. "Mom, be careful. People do crazy things for money." "What do you mean?" "Daniel is used to luxury. If he realizes he could lose everything..." Margaret took her daughter's hand. "Carol, you don't think he would hurt me, do you?" "I don't think we know him as well as we think we do." 3 days after meeting with Carol, Margaret felt as if she had finally taken off her rose-colored glasses. Every gesture Daniel made, every word he spoke now seemed calculated to her. She sat in her home office, looking through her bank statements for the last 6 months, and the numbers spoke for themselves. $120,000. That was how much she had spent on Daniel in 6 months. Clothes, restaurants, the gym, the car he had borrowed and still hadn't returned. And now he was asking for another $100,000 for a business he couldn't give her any details about. "Margaret?" Daniel appeared in the office doorway, wearing the new Armani suit she had bought him last week. "You missed breakfast." "I'm not hungry." She didn't look up from the documents. "What are you studying so intently?" Daniel tried to look over her shoulder, but Margaret closed the folder. "Financial documents. Boring. Maybe I can help? I have experience in business." Margaret finally looked at him. "What experience, Daniel?" "You haven't worked a day since we met." Daniel blinked, clearly not expecting such directness. "I worked as a fitness consultant before we met. I helped many people achieve their goals." "A fitness consultant." Margaret repeated his words with a hint of irony. "And how much did you earn?" "Enough to live a normal life." "But not enough for the life you're living now." An awkward silence hung in the air. Daniel shifted from one foot to the other. Margaret, if it's about money, I understand your concern. But once we open the gym... We? Margaret stood up from the table. Daniel, I think we need to have a serious talk. About what? About us. About our relationship. About what's going on. Daniel felt something cold stir in his stomach. I don't understand. We're happy. Happy? Margaret walked around the table and stood in front of him. Daniel, do you know how much money you've spent in the last 6 months? I don't keep track. $120,000. The figure hit him like a blow. That's more than the average American earns in 2 years. Daniel tried to smile. But we can afford it. You're a successful woman. You have money. I have money, Margaret emphasized. I have money, not we have money. I thought we were partners. Partners share both income and expenses. What do you bring to our relationship besides your charm? Daniel felt himself burning with shame and anger. I thought you loved me. I thought I did, but now I'm not sure I know the real you. At that moment, Margaret's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw Tom Bradley's name. Excuse me, I have to take this. She picked up the phone. Tom? Margaret, I've prepared a new version of the will. When can you come over to sign it? How about tomorrow morning? Great. 10 o'clock? Perfect. Daniel listened to the conversation, feeling his heart pound wildly. The will. Margaret was going to change her will. After Margaret hung up, Daniel tried to pull himself together. Everything okay? Yeah, just the usual stuff with the lawyer. Something business-related? Margaret gave him a long look. Something to do with the future. Daniel nodded, but his mind was racing. He knew what was in Margaret's will. She had told him herself a year ago, in a moment of great intimacy, $2 million and a house in Miami. But if she was having doubts about their relationship, Margaret, I want you to know that I'm serious about our future. What future do you see for us? Daniel took a step closer. I see us married. I see us building something together. Maybe we'll have a family. A family? Margaret laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. Daniel, I'm 58 years old. What family? I mean our family, the two of us. The two of us? Or my money and you? Daniel felt the ground slip away beneath his feet. How can you say that? Easy, because in 2 years, you've never once offered to pay the check at a restaurant. You've never brought home flowers you bought with your own money. You've never given me a gift that wasn't paid for with my credit card. Each word was like a slap in the face. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but realized he had nothing to say. I think you should find another place to live, Margaret said quietly. What? Daniel felt the world crumbling around him. Margaret, please don't do this. We can talk about it. No, we can't, because there's nothing to discuss. Margaret returned to the table. I'll give you a week to find an apartment. That should be enough time. Daniel stood in the doorway, unable to believe what was happening. What about love? What about everything we've built? We didn't build anything, Daniel. You just lived in my house and spent my money. After Daniel left, Margaret sank into a chair and covered her face with her hands. She felt both relief and bitterness. Relief that she had finally told the truth. Bitterness that she had wasted 2 years of her life on an illusion. Daniel left the house and got into his car, the BMW Margaret had bought him for his birthday. His hands were shaking as he took out his phone. Mike, it's Daniel. I need to meet you, right away. What's wrong? Everything's gone to hell. She's kicking me out. Then you'd better find the money somewhere else. My people won't wait. Give me a little more time. I'll think of something. Time ran out 3 days ago, Daniel. If I don't have the money by tomorrow morning, you won't have kneecaps by tomorrow night. Daniel closed his eyes. I'll find the money. I hope so, for your sake. Meanwhile, Margaret was calling Carol. Hi, Mom, how are you? I told Daniel he has to move out. Really? How did he react? Badly, but I've made up my mind. Margaret went to the window. I'm meeting Tom tomorrow morning to sign a new will. That's the right thing to do. What about the business? Is Daniel involved in the company in any way? No, thank God. He was never interested in real work. Mom, be careful. Men like Daniel don't like to lose what they think is theirs. What do you mean? He's been living in luxury at your expense for 2 years. He's used to it, and he knows he was in the will. How do you know? You told me yourself. Remember we talked about it last Christmas? Margaret remembered. Yes, she had mentioned it. Do you think he could be dangerous? I think $15 million is a serious motive for a lot of people. 15 million? Mom, you remember the size of your fortune, don't you? Margaret suddenly realized that she had never told Daniel the exact amount. She had only told him about the 2 million in the will, but had not mentioned the full size of the inheritance. Carol, what if he doesn't know the real amount? What do you mean? What if he thinks it's only 2 million? Mom, it doesn't matter if it's 2 million or 15. For someone with no money, it's a huge amount. That evening, Daniel met Mike at the same bar on the east side of town. The place was half empty, which suited them both. So your sugar mommy kicked you out? Mike smirked. I can't say I'm surprised. It's temporary. I'll find a way to fix it. How? Daniel took a big gulp of whiskey. She put me in her will, $2 million. Did she or will she? She already did, a year ago. Daniel leaned closer. But now she's going to change everything. And what are you going to do? I don't know, but I have to think of something. Mike looked at him for a long time. Daniel, you sound like a man who's about to do something stupid. I sound like a man who doesn't want to lose everything. Everything? You had nothing when you met her. But now I do, and I'm not going to lose it. Mike shook his head. Take my advice. Get a job, pay off your debts, and forget about the rich aunt. There are plenty of other ways to make money. Not that kind of money. Daniel, I'm serious. Don't do anything you'll regret. But Daniel wasn't listening anymore. He was thinking about the house in Shaker Heights, the car, the life he'd been living for the past 2 years. He was thinking about going back to his old apartment, his old life, the job he hated. She's meeting with a lawyer tomorrow, he said quietly. So what? If she signs a new will, I won't get anything. Daniel. No, listen. What if something happens to her before tomorrow? Mike slammed his glass down on the table. Stop. Right now. I don't want to hear it. I'm just thinking out loud. Think to yourself and think about something else. Mike stood up. I'm leaving, and I suggest you do the same. Daniel was left alone in the bar, staring into his glass. The bartender turned on the TV, and the news was reporting on a woman who had died in a car accident. Slippery roads, poor visibility. Accident. Accident. Daniel looked up at the screen. The woman was about the same age as Margaret. An accident that changed the life of an entire family. He finished his whiskey and stepped out into the cold January night. The snow continued to fall, making the roads slippery and dangerous. Very dangerous for people who weren't used to such conditions. Daniel got into his car and slowly drove toward home. Toward the house that would no longer be his home tomorrow. Toward the woman who would rob him of his future tomorrow. Margaret woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of breaking glass. She lay in bed, listening to the silence of the house, trying to understand what had woken her up. Maybe it was a dream, but the sound seemed so real. She got up, threw on her robe, and quietly went downstairs. Everything was in its place in the living room. The kitchen looked normal too. Only when she approached the back door leading to the garden did she see broken glass on the floor. The frame with Roger's photo lay on the tile floor, the glass scattered in small shards. Margaret bent down to pick up the photo. Maybe the frame had fallen off the table because of the vibration from passing trucks, or because of the wind that had been rattling the shutters all night. But when she picked up the photo, she found a note on the back, written in familiar handwriting. Some decisions cannot be undone. Think twice. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. Daniel. He had been here last night. Somehow he had gotten into the house and left this message. She quickly went upstairs and checked the locks on all the doors. Everything was locked. Then how did he get in? He had the keys, which she had never asked him to return. Margaret picked up the phone and dialed the locksmith's number. Despite the early hour, she left a message asking him to change all the locks in the house immediately. Then she called the security company to activate the alarm, which had been idle for several years. At 7 in the morning, she called Carol. "Mom? What's wrong? You're calling so early." "Daniel was in the house last night. He left a note." "What?" Carol was instantly awake. "What note?" Margaret read the words on the back of the photo. "Mom, it's a threat. You need to call the police." "What am I going to tell them? That my ex-lover left a note?" "Tell them someone broke into your house and left a threatening message." "But I can't prove it was Daniel." "Mom, listen to me. Cancel your meeting with the lawyer. Wait a few days." "No." Margaret's voice was firm. "I won't let him intimidate me. The meeting will take place. Then I'll go with you." "Carol, you have work to do." "Work can wait. I'm not leaving you alone." Daniel spent the night in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Cleveland. He didn't sleep, smoking cigarette after cigarette and thinking about how quickly everything had changed. Just yesterday morning, he had been eating breakfast in a $500,000 house, and now he was lying on a creaky bed, staring at the ceiling with water stains. The note had been an impulsive decision. He had returned to the house around 2 in the morning, using the keys Margaret had forgotten to take from him. He had wanted to take a few things, but when he saw Roger's photo on the table, something inside him exploded. Roger Winters. The perfect husband, a successful businessman, a man Daniel could never compare to. Even dead, he continued to stand between Daniel and what should have been rightfully his. The phone rang. "Mike." "Daniel, I need an answer now." "What answer?" "The money. Where's my money?" "Mike, give me one more day, just one day." "One day? For what?" Daniel closed his eyes. "To figure everything out." "How are you going to figure it out?" "Just give me some time." Mike was silent. "Daniel, if you're doing what I think you're doing, stop. Right now." "I'm not doing anything." "Then where's my money?" "Tomorrow. You'll have the money tomorrow." "Tomorrow or never, Daniel. This is your last warning." After Mike hung up, Daniel stood up and walked over to the window. Snow continued to fall, covering the city in a white blanket. Beautiful, deceptive snow that made the roads deadly dangerous. He thought about Margaret's meeting with the lawyer. 10 in the morning, Tom Bradley's office in the city center. If she signed the new will, it would all be over. But if something happened on the way, Daniel shook his head. He wasn't a murderer. He was just a man in a desperate situation. But sometimes desperate situations call for desperate measures. At 8 in the morning, Margaret met with the locksmith. The elderly man examined the locks and shook his head. "These locks are old, Mrs. Winters. They're easy to pick, even without keys. Replace them all and put in extra bolts. That will take several hours." "It doesn't matter. Do it." Carol arrived at 8:30. She looked worried and tired. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Fine. A little nervous. Maybe we should postpone the meeting?" "Number, the sooner I get it done, the better." They left the house at 9:30. Carol drove while Margaret looked out the window at the snow-covered streets of Cleveland. Traffic was slow due to the weather. "Mom, are you sure it was Daniel? It was his handwriting. Who else could have gotten into the house?" "Maybe we should change our phone number?" "I've already thought about that." Daniel followed them 3 cars back. He had rented an old pickup truck. His BMW was too conspicuous. The snow was getting heavier, and visibility was deteriorating. Perfect conditions for an accident. At the traffic lights in front of the office building, Daniel stopped and watched Margaret and Carol get out of the car. Margaret looked determined, despite the circumstances. Carol held her arm, as if protecting her. Daniel felt a pang of conscience. Margaret was a good woman. She didn't deserve what he was planning to do, but she also didn't deserve to have her life ruined. He took out his phone and dialed Margaret's number. "Hello?" Margaret's voice was wary. "Margaret, it's me." "Daniel? How did you get my number?" "It doesn't matter. I need to talk to you." "There's nothing to talk about. Please, just 5 minutes." "No, and don't call me again." Margaret hung up. Daniel sat in his car, clenching the steering wheel. His last chance for a peaceful resolution was gone. In Tom Bradley's office, Margaret and Carol sat in leather chairs while the lawyer explained the changes to the will. So, Daniel Coleman is completely excluded from the document. His share goes to the Roger Winters Charitable Trust. "That's correct," Carol said. "What about the house in Miami?" Margaret asked. "It stays in the family." Carol will be the sole heir to all the real estate. Margaret nodded. Tom, if anything happens to me, I want you to make sure that Daniel doesn't get anything. Margaret, that sounds grim. Are you afraid of something? Margaret and Carol exchanged glances. Just be careful. Daniel may try to contest the will. On what grounds? On the grounds that he's used to getting what he wants. Tom opened the new documents. Then let's make everything as clear as possible. Daniel had been waiting in the car for an hour and a half. The snow continued to fall, making the streets increasingly slippery. Finally, he saw Margaret and Carol emerge from the building. They were talking about something, and Margaret looked relieved. So, the will had been changed. $2 million had disappeared from his future. But not just $2 million. The whole life he had planned had gone up in smoke. Carol got behind the wheel, and they drove toward home. Daniel started the engine and followed them. He knew this road by heart. He knew every turn, every dangerous spot, especially the dangerous stretch on Farmont Road, where the road made a sharp turn near the old bridge. In good weather, it wasn't a problem. But in a snowstorm, when the road was as slippery as a skating rink, Daniel sped up. The pickup was heavy and had good traction. Carol's car was lighter and less stable on the slippery road. On the straight stretch before the turn, Daniel pulled closer. Margaret turned and saw him in the rearview mirror. Even from a distance, he could see the fear in her eyes. Carol also noticed the pickup truck. Mom, is that him? Yes, he's following us. What does he want? I don't know, but I don't like it. Carol accelerated, but the road was too slippery for fast driving. Daniel easily caught up with them. Now he was driving right behind them, dangerously close. He's crazy, Margaret whispered. The turn was approaching. Daniel knew that if he rammed their car at the right moment, it could veer off the road. The slope was steep, and a river flowed below. In winter, the river did not freeze completely because of the current. Daniel accelerated. The pickup truck approached the bumper of Carol's car, just a little more, and suddenly, Carol swerved sharply to the left, pulling into oncoming traffic. Daniel sped past, unable to react in time. When he braked and turned around, Carol's car had already disappeared around the bend. Daniel slammed his fist on the steering wheel. The chance was lost. They knew he was following them. Now they would be careful. Margaret and Carol made it home and locked themselves inside. Carol immediately called the police. Officer, a man was following us on the road. He was acting aggressively and creating a dangerous situation. Do you know this man? Yes, it's Daniel Coleman, my mother's ex-boyfriend. We'll send a patrol car to file a report. After Carol hung up, Margaret sat down in a chair and closed her eyes. I should have listened to you earlier. Mom, everything will be fine. The will has been changed and the police have been notified. He can't hurt you. But Margaret wasn't so sure. She had seen Daniel's expression in the rearview mirror. It was the look of a desperate man who had lost everything and was willing to do anything to get revenge. Daniel returned to the motel and lay down on the bed. His plan had failed. Now the police knew about him. Mike was demanding money. Margaret had changed the will, but the game wasn't over yet. He took out his phone and dialed a number he found on the internet. Shield Detective Agency. How can I help you? I need information about a man. Complete information. Where he lives, where he works, what route he takes. That'll be $500. Money's no problem. Name? Carol Winters. She works at First National Bank of Cleveland. Daniel hung up and smiled. If he couldn't get to Margaret, he'd get to what she loved most, her daughter. That evening, a police patrol arrived at the Winters house. Officer Johnson listened to Carol's story and took her statement. Miss Winters, we can increase patrols in your neighborhood, but until Mr. Coleman commits a crime, we can't arrest him. What about the road rage? It's your word against his. If he does it again, call 911 immediately. After the police left, Margaret and Carol sat in the living room drinking tea. Maybe I should stay for a few days, Carol suggested. You have your own life. Mom, you're more important than any job. Margaret took her daughter's hand. I'm so glad we made up. Me too. It's a shame it took a crisis. Crises sometimes show us what's really important. They didn't know that Daniel was sitting in his car across the street. watching the house. The detective agency was working fast. Tomorrow morning, he would know everything he needed to know about Carol. For now, all he could do was wait and plan. Margaret thought she was safe behind her new locks and the police patrol. But she had forgotten one important thing. Every person has a weak spot, and Carol was Margaret's weak spot. Detective Sarah Mitchell received a call at 6:47 a.m. 20 years on the Cleveland police force had taught her that calls at dawn rarely brought good news. She was right. Detective Mitchell, this is dispatch. We have a body in Shaker Heights, 1247 Farmount Road. Female, suspected homicide. Sarah was already on her feet, pulling on her uniform. Who called? The victim's daughter, Carol Winters. She came to visit her mother and found her dead. Patrol on the scene? Officers Johnson and Riley are already there. They're waiting for you. Sarah knew the Winters house. Last night, she had personally reviewed the report of the road rage incident. Coincidence? In her line of work, there were no coincidences. The drive to Shaker Heights took 20 minutes. The snow that had been falling for the last 3 days had finally stopped, leaving the city under a white blanket. 2 patrol cars and an ambulance were parked outside the house. Yellow tape cordoned off the perimeter. Officer Johnson met her at the entrance. Detective, this is a difficult case. What do we have? Margaret Winters, 58 years old. Found by her daughter around 6 this morning, body in the bedroom on the 2nd floor. Cause of death? Not clear yet. No visible wounds, but there are signs of a struggle. Sarah put on gloves and shoe covers. Where's the daughter? In the living room. She's in shock but holding up. She says everything was fine with her mother last night. Sarah climbed the marble staircase. The house exuded wealth and taste, but now the luxury seemed out of place. Death did not discriminate between the poor and the rich. The bedroom was at the end of the hallway. Margaret Winters lay on the floor next to the bed, dressed in a silk nightgown. Her hair was disheveled, her face showing signs of fear. Pillows were scattered around the body, and a bedside lamp had been knocked over. Someone was looking for her, Sarah muttered as she looked around the room. The drawers of the dresser were pulled out, their contents scattered. Or wanted to make it look like a robbery. Forensic technician Dave Cohen was already working with his camera. Detective, take a look at this. Sarah moved closer. There were faint bruises on the victim's neck. Strangulation? Looks like it, but neat, professional. Or someone who knew what they were doing. Sarah checked the windows, all locked from the inside. Point of entry? The front door. The lock wasn't picked, but it had been replaced yesterday. Someone could have gotten in while the locksmith was working. Or someone had a key. Johnson nodded. The daughter mentioned her mother's ex-boyfriend, Daniel Coleman. He was following them on the road yesterday. Sarah made a note in her notebook. I need to talk to her. Carol Winters sat in the living room, clutching a cup of coffee with trembling hands. She was 35, but she looked much older now. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale. Miss Winters, I'm Detective Mitchell. I'm very sorry for your loss. Carol nodded. Thank you. Tell me what happened this morning. I arrived at 6:30. We had agreed to have breakfast together. Carol's voice trembled. The door was locked, but I knew the code for the new alarm system. When I entered, the house was too quiet. Mom was usually in the kitchen at that time. Did you go upstairs right away? I checked the first floor first, then I went up to the bedroom. Carol closed her eyes. She was lying on the floor. I knew right away that she was dead. Did you touch anything in the room? Number I checked her pulse and called the police right away. Sarah sat down opposite her. Tell me about yesterday. We met with the lawyer. Mom changed her will. Carol looked at the detective. She disinherited Daniel. Daniel Coleman? Yes. He lived here for 2 years. Mom was supporting him. And how did he react to the breakup? Badly. Yesterday he followed us on the road. We called the police. Sarah nodded. I need to know everything about your relationship with Mr. Coleman. We didn't have a relationship. I didn't approve of him from the start. Why? He was 26 years younger than my mother. He never worked. He spent her money like water. Carol wiped her eyes. Mom was a smart woman, but she was a woman in love. Did he know about the will? Yes. Mom told him a year ago, $2 million and a house in Miami. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's a serious motive. Detective, I know what you're thinking, but Daniel isn't a murderer. He's selfish and a jerk, but he's not a murderer. People kill for less. An hour later, the coroner arrived at the house. Dr. Helen Resnick had been working with bodies for 30 years and could determine the cause of death with Swiss precision. What can you tell us, Doc? Sarah asked. Strangulation, compression of the carotid arteries. Death was quick, within a minute. Time of death? Between midnight and 3 in the morning. I'll be more precise after the autopsy. Any signs of sexual assault? Number this was not a robbery rape. Sarah looked around the rest of the house. In Margaret's study, the desk drawers had been ransacked, but the expensive electronics were untouched. The jewelry in the bedroom was also missing. They were looking for something specific, she told Dave. Documents? Possibly, or money. At noon, Sarah drove to the Sunrise Motel on the outskirts of town. The clerk, a sleepy middle-aged man, reluctantly checked the records. Daniel Coleman? Yes, he's here, room 14, but I haven't seen him since this morning. When did he check in? The day before yesterday. He paid cash for 3 days. Sarah knocked on the door of room 14. No answer. She peeked through the window and saw a few things on the bed, but Coleman himself was nowhere to be seen. Do you know what kind of car he drives? A white pickup truck. A Ford, I think. I don't remember the license plate number. Sarah returned to the station and ran a search in the database. Daniel Coleman, 32 years old. No serious offenses, just a few speeding tickets. He had worked at various gyms for the past 10 years. She called his last place of employment. Coleman? We fired him 8 months ago, said the gym manager. He was stealing from the cash register. Did you report it to the police? Number, we just fired him. Didn't want to get involved with the courts. Sarah hung up. The picture was not looking good. A man with no steady income, living off a wealthy mistress, with a history of petty theft. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a call came in from a patrol officer. Detective, we found a white Ford pickup truck in the parking lot of the Beechwood Mall. It's registered to a rental company. Is Coleman there? Number the car is empty, but there are traces of blood inside. Sarah rushed to the scene. The pickup truck was parked in the far corner of the parking lot, away from the surveillance cameras. Technicians were already working on the vehicle. What do we have? Blood stains on the steering wheel and passenger seat. Not much, but enough for DNA. What about Coleman himself? He's gone. We're checking the bus station and the airport. Sarah looked around the interior. A newspaper from the previous day lay on the floor, open at the real estate listings. Several apartments were circled in red. He was looking for a new place, she muttered. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Sarah returned to Carol Winters. The young woman was still in the house, packing her mother's belongings. Miss Winters, I need to ask you a few more questions. Of course. Did your mother keep large amounts of cash at home? No, she used cards and checks. What about documents? Anything valuable? Carol thought for a moment. The safe contained real estate documents and company shares, but I didn't check to see if everything was there. Where is the safe? In the study, behind the painting. They went down to the study. The safe was open, its contents scattered across the floor. It wasn't like this morning, Carol said. I would have noticed. Sarah crouched down and examined the documents. What was supposed to be here? The will, the house documents, Dad's company shares. Carol suddenly turned pale. Detective, there's no will here. What will? The new one. The one Mom signed yesterday. Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place. Did Coleman know about the change in the will? Maybe. Mom could have told him. And if the new will disappears, the old one remains in force? Yes, the one where Daniel gets $2 million. Sarah took out her phone. I need to talk to your mother's lawyer, right away. Tom Bradley received the detective in his office half an hour later. The elderly lawyer looked shaken by the news of Margaret's death. Mr. Bradley, I need a copy of the will Mrs. Winters signed yesterday. Of course, but detective, there's a problem. What is it? Margaret took the original with her. I have a copy, but for court we need the original with her signature. And if the original disappears? The previous will remains in force. Daniel Coleman is one of the main beneficiaries. Sarah nodded. The motive was becoming clearer. Mr. Bradley, who else knew about yesterday's meeting? No one but the three of us. Margaret was very careful. But could Coleman have been following her? Possibly. She mentioned that he had left threatening notes. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Sarah gathered the team for a briefing. Johnson, Riley, and 2 other detectives were in the room. So, what do we have? The victim is Margaret Winters, 58 years old, a wealthy widow. Cause of death, strangulation. Time of death, between midnight and 3 in the morning. Sarah walked over to the board and wrote the suspect's name. The prime suspect is Daniel Coleman, 32 years old. The motive is money. He was cut out of the new will, but if the original document disappears, he'll get $2 million. Alibi? Johnson asked. Not yet, he's disappeared, his car has been abandoned, and there are traces of blood inside. Any other suspects? Sarah thought for a moment. The victim's daughter, Carol Winters. She's the sole heir under the new will. But she found the body. That doesn't rule her out as a suspect. Family murders aren't uncommon. Riley raised his hand. What about robbery? Maybe it was just a coincidence? No, a robber wouldn't have looked for specific documents. This was a targeted killing. Sarah looked at the city map. Coleman couldn't have gotten far on foot. Check all the motels within a 5-mile radius, the bus station, taxis, everything. At 8 p.m., a call came in from patrol. Detective, we found Daniel Coleman. Where? At the Flats bar on the east side. He's drunk and aggressive. Arrest him on suspicion of murder. I'm on my way. The Flats was a typical working-class bar. Smoke, loud music, the smell of beer and sweat. Daniel Coleman sat at a corner table, staring into his glass of whiskey. When the officers approached him, he didn't resist. He looked like a man who had lost everything and knew it. Daniel Coleman, you're under arrest on suspicion of murdering Margaret Winters. Daniel looked up at Sarah. Is she dead? Don't pretend you don't know. I didn't kill her. Then where were you last night? Here, drinking. The bartender nodded. He came in around midnight and didn't leave until morning. Sarah frowned. If that was true, Daniel's alibi was solid. But then who killed Margaret Winters? Daniel was taken to the station for questioning. Sarah stayed at the bar, thinking about the case. Something didn't add up. All the evidence pointed to Coleman, but his alibi seemed ironclad. She took out her phone and called the lab. Dave, check the DNA from the blood in the pickup truck. I need to know whose blood it is. It'll take a few hours. Work through the night. This is important. Sarah returned to the station, where Daniel was sitting in the interrogation room. He looked broken, but not like a murderer. Mr. Coleman, let's talk. The interrogation room at the station was small and stuffy. Daniel Coleman sat at a metal table, clutching a cup of coffee with trembling hands. Detective Mitchell studied his face, looking for signs of guilt or deception. Mr. Coleman, tell me about your relationship with Margaret Winters. We dated for 2 years. We lived together. Daniel's voice was hoarse from alcohol and exhaustion. Did she support you financially? Yes. He didn't try to deny the obvious. And when she decided to end the relationship, you got angry. Of course I was angry, but I didn't kill her. Sarah opened the folder with photos of the crime scene. Then explain why your fingerprints are all over the house. I lived there for 2 years. My fingerprints should be everywhere. And your alibi for the time of the murder? I was at the Flats bar, from midnight until morning. Ask the bartender. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Officer Johnson motioned for Sarah to leave. Detective, we have the DNA results. The blood in the pickup truck belongs to Carol Winters. Sarah frowned. That changes things. Release Coleman, but keep him under surveillance. Daniel left the station, but Detective Mitchell felt that something was wrong. The alibi seemed too convenient. The next day, she drove to Carol Winters' house. The young woman met her at the door, still dressed in black. Miss Winters, I need to ask you a few questions about the blood found in Daniel's car. Carol turned pale. What blood? Your blood. The DNA results show an exact match. I don't understand. Where were you last night? At home. I already told you. Sarah noticed a scratch on Carol's arm. How did you get that? Yesterday, when I was packing my mother's things. Miss Winters, I need you to come with me to the station. At the station, under pressure, Carol admitted that she had met Daniel near her mother's house that night. He was drunk and aggressive. We got into a fight and he hurt my arm. Sarah wrote down the statement, but something bothered her. The story sounded plausible, but the details didn't add up. 2 days later, Sarah decided to check Daniel's alibi again. She returned to the Flats bar and questioned the staff thoroughly. Jim, you said Coleman was here all night? The bartender nodded. From midnight until morning. And you didn't leave? To go to the bathroom, smoke? Well, maybe for a couple of minutes. And Coleman could have left during that time? Jim thought for a moment. Theoretically, yes, but why would he? Sarah looked around the bar more closely. A back door led directly to the parking lot. Daniel could have slipped out and returned unnoticed. She checked the distance from the bar to the Winters house, 20 minutes by car, enough time to commit murder and return. The next day, Sarah received new information from the bank. Detective, you asked me to check Coleman's financial transactions? Yes. Yesterday morning, an hour before his arrest, he withdrew $500 from an ATM near the Flats bar. Sarah frowned. But he said he spent the whole night there. According to the ATM records, he was there at 6 in the morning. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Daniel had lied about the time. Sarah returned to the surveillance camera footage. After a long search, she found what she was looking for. The gas station camera showed a white pickup truck driving by at 2:30 a.m. in the direction of the Winters house. Dave, can you zoom in on the license plate? The technician worked on the image. The number matches the car Coleman rented. Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline. Daniel had been at the crime scene, but there was still the question of Carol's blood in the car. Sarah decided to conduct an experiment. Miss Winters, can you show me exactly how you were injured? Carol demonstrated how Daniel had squeezed her hand, but the amount of blood didn't match the size of the scratch. Show me again, more slowly. This time, Sarah noticed something fishy. Carol was deliberately pressing on an old scratch to squeeze out more blood. Miss Winters, this scratch isn't fresh. It's several days old. Carol fell silent. Sarah analyzed all the evidence again. Daniel had arranged to meet Carol near her house and deliberately cut her hand so that her blood would get into the car. He then created a false alibi at the bar. That evening, she arrested Daniel again. Mr. Coleman, you lied about your alibi. No, I was at the bar. Surveillance footage shows your car near the Winters house at 2:30 a.m. Daniel turned pale but continued to deny it. And Carol's blood in the car is your attempt to frame her. That's absurd. Sarah placed the photos on the table. You deliberately cut Carol's hand to leave her blood in the car. Then you went back to the bar and bribed the bartender to confirm your alibi. You have no proof. I have video footage, witness statements, and your false testimony. Sarah took out another folder. And I have this. She showed him a bank statement. You paid the bartender $1,000 in cash yesterday morning. Where did you get the money if you're broke? Daniel lowered his head. Mr. Coleman, tell me what happened that night. There was a long silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. I didn't plan to kill her. I just wanted to talk. Go on. I got to the house around 2 in the morning. Margaret was awake, sitting in the living room. And? I asked her not to change her will. I told her I loved her. But she refused. Yes, she said it was over, that I would never get a penny. Daniel closed his eyes. I got angry. I grabbed her by the throat. I just wanted to scare her. But you squeezed too hard. I didn't mean to kill her. But when I realized she was dead, you decided to frame Carol. I panicked. I moved the body to the bedroom, broke into the safe. Then I drove to Carol's and made her cut her arm. I said I saw a burglar near the house, that she needed to check on her mother. During our fight, I hurt her arm. And then you went back to the bar. Yes, I bribed Jim to say I was there all night. Sarah closed her notebook. Daniel Coleman, you are under arrest for the first-degree murder of Margaret Winters. At the trial, Daniel tried to argue second-degree murder, but the prosecutor proved intent through the prepared alibi and the attempt to frame an innocent person. Bartender Jim received a 1-year suspended sentence for perjury. Carol Winters was completely exonerated and received her mother's inheritance, which she donated to a charitable foundation. Daniel Coleman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his final statement, he said, "Money really is the root of all evil, but not for those who have it, but for those who crave it." Detective Sarah Mitchell closed the case, reflecting on how greed can turn an ordinary person into a cold-blooded killer. Daniel not only killed Margaret, but also tried to destroy her daughter's life. In the end, justice prevailed, but the price was too high.